So, I could be talking about Battlefront 2 and the whole loot box controversy that started because of it, but we all knew that would come crashing down someday on top of them, so I really don't want to talk about it. So, instead, let's talk about Sonic Forces. Just in case you haven't heard, the new Sonic game has gotten very mixed reviews by critics and the community alike, and is generally considered the newest in the collection of mediocre Sonic games. Very mediocre, unfortunately. What's especially disappointing about it being so mediocre is that Sonic Mania, the retro counterpart to this year's biggest flop, besides the obvious one, Battlefront 2, got incredible critical acclaim. So, what makes one flop and the other famous? Well, I think that there's one specific entity that affects this entire year for these two games. Classic Sonic. But what do we mean by Classic Sonic? Generally, in the span of the internet, Classic Sonic can be seen as a form of Sonic that is entirely focused on 2D gameplay and has multiple elements that bring back feelings of nostalgia towards the Genesis era, such as the Spin Dash, such as Ringmire, such as Badniks, etc. Now, what's weird is that there are actually two different styles of classic Sonic present today. There's the form of gameplay present in Sonic Mania, and there's the form of gameplay that's present in Generations and Forces. For the sake of clarity, I will refer to the former as Genesis Sonic, since it's more reminiscent of the Genesis games, and the latter as Retro Sonic, as it's retro in the cool, hip way for modern people. Now, the idea of classic Sonic generally revolves about on the idea of invoking childhood nostalgia for the Genesis games, your Sonic 1, your Sonic 2, your Sonic 3 Knuckles, your Sonic CDs, you know. And generally, Sonic Mania and therefore Genesis Sonic better shows this search for the closer to the Genesis games, and this is generally reflected by the community love for Sonic Mania and all it represents. The jumping feels right, the rolling carries momentum, and just the entire experience with the 8-bit graphics and the 2D section, the entire 2D focus, generally gives a much greater feeling for the Genesis era. However, Retro Sonic is much more the modern take on classic Sonic gameplay, with the spin dash more being a giant burst of speed and momentum that just sends them off into the distance and into the air, and the rolling attack has a much more automatic and unnatural feel to it. So, in terms of invoking nostalgia, Genesis Sonic seems to be the best style to do. What is interesting is that Sonic Generations got away with using Retro Sonic, although it technically, according to this entire argument, used the inferior form of classic Sonic gameplay. What separates Sonic Generations and what makes it interesting, it was the first time that this idea of celebrating Sonic's past was done, and Retro Sonic was first introduced in this game. It was the first time that this Retro Sonic's gameplay was implemented. And while technically Sonic 4 was the first time this idea of trying to go 2D and retro and all this stuff started, that game failed, so Sonic Generations was the first successful one. Another major factor about both Sonic Generations and Sonic Mania is that they were both meant as celebrations of Sonic's past, with Sonic Generations being an entire celebration of Sonic, while Sonic Mania was meant completely as a celebration of the Genesis era of Sonic. Sonic Forces, very obviously due to differing story, all that stuff, the levels, is not. Absolutely not. And I think this is the biggest problem with Retro Sonic's presence in Sonic Forces. It wasn't needed at all. While classic Sonic did have some plot relevance, and when I mean some, I mean very, very little, it wasn't needed at all. And I bet that the entire idea of classic Sonic could have been cut from Forces. And yes, there would be a few things that would have to be changed with the plot, the bosses. Obviously, the Eggman and Eggman Dragoon would have been cut entirely, but just some general small changes. But without the presence of Retro Sonic, we could have had more time spent on modern Sonic physics, making the levels far less linear, making the avatars gameplay feel a lot more fulfilling, and getting the physics right, and so much more. But because of Retro Sonic being squished into this game for no reason, they had to split gameplay 3 different ways instead of 2 different ways, and that meant a lot less time could be focused on the good stuff in this game, meaning that just sent it more and more mediocre in nature. But here's a question. If Retro Sonic is bad and modern Sonic, and Retro Sonic is focused around 2D sections, shouldn't we cut 2D sections in general and focus on 3D Sonic gameplay? Well, it makes sense because of the fact if we cut 2D gameplay, we don't have to worry about focusing on nostalgia and all that stuff, but I want to say no to that. Modern 2D sections are not the problem here. They were never the problem. While, yes, they are incredibly linear in Sonic Forces, that is much more of a problem with Sonic Forces in general, and going back to Retro Sonic's unnecessary inclusion, if they spent more time on that, I bet it could have been a lot less linear. But both Sonic Generations and Sonic Colors show that modern 2D sections are not the problem, that they work. Sonic Colors especially is mostly 2.5D, or just 2D in fact, yet it's so incredibly loved by the Sonic community, by a lot of people. So if a modern Sonic game is mostly 2D with some 3D elements in it, then the modern 2D sections are not the problem. Another thing is that Sonic can truly not be fully 3D in the way that we want Sonic to be 3D. People always want speed, and modern 2D, I believe, is the best way to do this. But modern 2D is also a way for Sonic games to create the bulk of its levels, and is sort of just like a packing technique to add more padding to it and all this stuff. And while that sounds bad, there have been a lot worse ways that has been done. Thinking back to the adventure games, Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog, where they would implement multiple different styles of gameplay, like your the cats, your Amy's, and they'd pretty much just use the same styles of gameplay, with maybe some minor boss changes or maybe a new level or two. Heck, Sonic Heroes was mostly the same game, just with 4 different stories, heavy quotations marks, stories, and not very much there. And even Sonic Adventure 2, which is loved by a lot of people, had to resort to using 2 other slower-paced gameplay styles, and although people love that, generally people preferred the speed sections, as well as the dark story, which is pretty much the exact same as the other story style, just to get this just to add more gameplay to the game, because otherwise it'd be an incredibly short game. And a lot of these people really hate those different styles and generally regard the speed sections as the better styles, and want more of those and more of those, and that's just not possible. Otherwise the game would be horrendously short. I feel that modern 2D sections are the best solution because they allow you to still get this speed just on a different plane, yet they also retain that platforming element as well, as shown in Colors and with the double jump and with the wisps and all this. So, what's my point? What I am saying is that Sonic Team needs to abandon Retro Sonic and its entire gameplay style. It doesn't work with modern Sonic. It's just an unnecessary crutch that is clearly holding modern Sonic back, as shown by Sonic Forces, and just ends up coming off like nostalgia pandering in the complete wrong way. I believe classic Sonic has a great connection to Green Hill Zone coming back, Chemical Plant coming back, because those are nostalgic levels, and Retro Sonic is all focused on nostalgia. And it just feels like unnecessary nostalgia pandering. If they want to embrace the idea of classic Sonic in all its glory, they can use the Genesis style of Sonic and create more games like Sonic Mania that's shown to work. And if they want to use more 2D sections in their games, which is another thing that Retro Sonic can do, they can just add more modern 2D sections and polish those and make those great and make a generally better Sonic game. Retro Sonic, in its entire idea and its execution, has been completely unnecessary for Sonic Forces. And if they continue it, it will be more completely unnecessary. And I really, really hope that they will abandon this idea in future Sonic games.